Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Outbreak Management Advisory Board. Whether you're watching at home, watching afterwards, or you're a member of the committee, welcome to the meeting. We've got quite a lot of agenda items to get through today that are included on the published agenda that's gone out on the City Council's website. My aim is to finish at or near to 7 o'clock. So there is our challenge, everybody, to try and do that. And I just wanted in the introduction section to mention that I'd had a request to change the order of the agenda slightly, which I have done. So the update on universities and higher education is now going to be in place of agenda item 4. And then agenda item 4 will just knock back one place on the agenda. So I hope that everybody is happy with that. And obviously, welcome to all committee members. That those watching at home will be able to see you on screen. And just to record 2 apologies that we've received from Alison from York CVS and from Phil at the CCG that we'll record in the minutes. The first agenda item is declarations of interest. So just to give anybody an opportunity to declare any interests, just checking for any virtual or actual hands. I can't see any, so no additional declarations to declare, which then takes us straight to agenda item 2. So that's the minutes of the meeting that we held on the 13th of January. I know that all actions in the action log have been completed, so it's not included in the agenda papers, and there were no actions arising from the last meeting. So I'd just like to check that you're happy to sign off the minutes. Probably what I'll say is, unless anybody raises their hand or indicates, I'll take that as acceptance of the minutes as a correct record. So thank you everybody for that. That then takes us straight on to agenda item 3, which is the regular report on the current situation in York. And Fiona Phillips is going to give a presentation which runs alongside the paper that's included in the agenda pack. So I'll hand straight over to Fiona.
Thank you. So yeah, so you've got the one pager on page 9 in the agenda, which gives an overview of where we are. So you can see in that you've got the epidemic curve and how cases are playing out. I can say that the latest validated date as of today is 144.3 per 100,000, so it's continued to come down since we published those papers. And obviously that's a very different position that we are in now than we were when we last met. So we now have rates that are lower than the regional and the England rate. In the one pager that you've got, it also talks about test and trace data and vaccination data. I'm going to give a bit more detail later on test and trace, and I think Steph will cover the vaccination in her item as well. So if we can bring up the slides, what I wanted to just focus on a little bit more today was to just give a bit of an overview really in terms of what's happened since the start of the year and in particular since we went into national lockdown. So if we go on to the first slide, you can see this is a sort of closer look at the data on a daily basis since the start of January up until the 2nd of February. So you can see that the cases were rising up until the 4th of January, which is when we saw our peak, where we had 245 diagnosed cases in one day. And then we went into national lockdown on the 5th of January, and we saw our cases start to fall. What I think is interesting when you look at this data is the 7-day blocks that I've indicated there with the red line. So we know that the incubation period for COVID, which is basically the time it takes from being in touch with someone who's infected to you then developing the disease yourself. We know that can be up to 10 days, but the average time period is about 5 to 7 days, and you can really see that on our data. So we had that peak on the 4th of January, and that peak reoccurs every 7 days since then, but each time with cases falling, it's kind of got smaller, and we're now sort of into the realms of around 40 cases being diagnosed in a day within York. So if we go on to the next slide then, and this just looks at what we're seeing in terms of cases by age group. So if you look from the period 1st to the 2nd of February, which is the green bars, you can see that it's the 30 to 59 age groups that are most affected. So those are the groups that are going out to work. We have also had a higher rate in the 90 plus age group, although the numbers in this age bracket are very small. And then the black bars are the rates in each of the age groups that we've seen throughout the whole period of the pandemic. And so what we can see is in this most recent period for the start of the year, we can see that generally the pattern has been the same throughout. The only exception was for the 10 to 19 age group, which we know related to a high number of cases in the student population back in October. But really the message is that the groups that we really need to focus on in terms of our comms messages and support around, you know, enforcing those mitigating messages is really that kind of those middle age range groups, the 30 to 59 age groups. If we move then on to the next slide. So you may remember last time we talked about the new variant, or the Kent variant as it's sometimes known as, and how really that has impacted in terms of what we've seen in terms of our case rates in York. So starting sort of from November going right through to mid-December at the time, we saw that the number of cases in York that were potentially attributed to the new variant, which we know is much more infectious, increased during that time period, and was potentially why we saw that sort of big increase in cases at the start of December and onwards. So then if we look at the next slide, this then just shows us what we've been seeing more recently. So
just to cut in, Fiona, if people at home are seeing it the way I am, we're experiencing a bit of a go slow on the slide, so they're taking a little while to get there, just so you know.
Okay, thank you. This I think this is my last slide anyway. So if it's caught up now, so this is the data on that new variant on the week from the 1st to the 7th of February, so the most recent data they have. And what this is showing us is that potentially about 85% of cases in York are the new variant. And as you can see from where there's data for the rest of the country, it is now the most dominant strain of the virus within the country. So what we're kind of seeing in other areas is that we are still on the downward trend in York in terms of case rates, and that's partly because we were starting from a high starting point. Other areas where they had lower case rates, they've seen a fall, but they're now kind of finding that they're plateauing and they're finding it difficult to get down to where we were from in that epidemic curve that we saw in September, early October, where we had very low case rates. Other areas are struggling to get down to those low rates, and that potentially is because of this this strain of the virus, which is now circulating, and as I say, is the most dominant strain in most parts of the country. So that's all the slides I had, and happy to answer any other questions around data.
Thank you very much for that, Fiona. And then open the agenda for any comments or questions if we have any at this stage of the meeting. Just to give a few seconds. If not, I'm sure we'll come back to anything with Sharon and Fiona later. So thank you for that. So we'll note the paper and the presentation. And then, as mentioned, I'm going to tweak the order of the agenda at this stage and move to what was agenda item 8, an upgroup from the Universities and Higher Education subgroup, and hand over to Charlie.
Thank you very much, Keith. I've written a report as usual. I just wanted to pull out a couple of points from it. The first is to say that lockdown's having its effect, the desired effect among university communities. We too saw a bump up in cases in the first half of January, but we've been going down. And the latest readout is that there are fewer than 25 active positive cases in the university communities of University of York and York St John. Lateral flow testing is now a very significant part of our toolkit. It has helped us find over 60 asymptomatic cases in university communities, staff and students, since the start of January, and finding them may well have prevented hundreds of onward transmissions. So it's really proving its value. The period of lateral flow testing supported by the Department for Education has now been extended to the end of March. We anticipate it will be extended further once we have the route map out of lockdown. As everyone else, we are awaiting the announcement of that route map on the 22nd of February to know what we can expect when the first relaxations will come in as of the 8th of March. We expect there to be at that point an opening up of the possibility of in-person teaching beyond the very small number of courses that are allowed to do that now. But it's unlikely we're going to see major changes at the two universities before Easter. Largely because the University of York term ends on the 19th, lockdown relaxation starts on the 8th, and York St John on the 26th. We think it would be problematic in public health terms to look for a major return to in-person teaching on campus, and then a couple of weeks later to say, right, we're packing up again. Movement of students twice in 2 or 3 weeks doesn't seem like a sensible thing. So while we will see some additional in-person teaching at both universities, the main return to the classroom will be after Easter. So remote education will continue for most students, as is the case also at York College and Askham Bryan College. That's made it a tough period for students, and we have real concerns that we do what we can to support student well-being. All of our institutions have spent significant sums on mitigating student hardship of various kinds, which has grown because students don't have their usual earning opportunities to support their way through their study. We've put a lot of funding in. We don't think government's put enough in, and we keep making that point. And gradually government has offered more support to students, but not yet enough. We've had a major focus also on mental health and well-being support, both through the various facilities we offer through our own institutions and, where necessary, connecting with NHS provision. And it's been heartening also to see the very clear and supportive messages that have come through the City Council on these issues. I think it's right that we are showing that focus and those concerns for well-being. It's been a long period, and it's been a very difficult period for students. Thank you, Keith.
Thank you very much for that, Charlie. Happy to open it for any comments or questions. The one thing I like to just mention is that there was a reference in the last paragraph of the paper to the advisory board building links to the Health and Wellbeing Board mental health partnership. And I know that Tracy Wallace, don't know, Tracy, if you could pop your camera on at this stage, but Tracy is the coordinator of the mental health partnership and offered to raise that with the independent chair of the partnership. Tracy, don't know if you want to add anything to that.
I don't think so at this stage, thank you, Chair. I will just flag the paper and have the conversation with the independent chair, and I can come back to Charlie and maybe some of the other board members on the outcome.
That's great. Thank you very much. So we'll take that away as an action, Charlie. Does that sound acceptable? Great. Any other questions or comments? If not, just to thank you very much, Charlie, for the report and the update, which is appreciated. And we'll now move back to agenda item 4, and that's an update on the vaccination programme. And I'll hand over to Steph. Thank you.
Thanks. Evening, everyone. So I've done the report in the pack, so I'll just get into the detail of it. We continue to work well with our local vaccination sites, along with the Vaccination Centre at Askham. We are working on our cohort 1 to 4, as are our North Yorkshire colleagues, and we are, as you would imagine, as we've gone down those age brackets, we're in the sort of mid 95% for the residents in cohorts 1 to 2, and we've had some busy clinics, and we continue to have busy clinics tomorrow, Friday, Saturday, that are targeting those higher numbers in the age groups over 70. So really good numbers for those who perhaps aren't aware of our sort of targets. We have a next target of the 15th of February to offer all of our residents who meet that cohort 1 to 4, and they're largely age related or frontline health and social care staff, and our trajectory is quite good on that. We continue to plan for next cohorts and address any areas where we think we need more work to make sure that we continue to get those figures as high as possible. And certainly this week in particular is the sort of clear 28-day for care homes that might have had a significant COVID outbreak. So we're just going back into 1 or 2 care homes that had their vaccination programs paused. Just go back, thinking back to Fiona's epidemiology, we had some very high numbers of COVID outbreaks. So we paused going into practices as they effectively locked down to manage their local outbreaks. So we're just going back in to do those. Fiona and I have slightly different numbers because obviously the numbers change frequently, but we're in that sort of 300 to 350,000 residents vaccinated. So one of the things that is a nuance of the York position is that we have a vaccination centre and local vaccination sites. So just a little bit about the vaccination centre at Askham. That runs via a national booking system, and we don't locally have any influence over that. So that is running alongside our local system. So the national system writes out to residents who they can draw down from patient data who have not had a vaccine at that point in time. So it's quite likely, as we start to get towards the end of a particular focus on an age group in a cohort, that residents will get an invite from the national service as well as being run by their GPs. and we make no apology for that. We really do want to access as many people as we can do. Some of the practical implications of that, of course, is that there's a time lag between when people are vaccinated and when their record in their GP surgery gets uploaded. And the point of me explaining that in some detail is that as we get towards the end of the 1 to 4 cohorts and the target of the 15th of February, we have vaccines that we don't want to waste. So local vaccination services at Askenbar and other sites are also preparing to move into the next cohort, which is those which are aged 65 to 69. So some of our residents will now start to be approached to say, you're in the next cohort, we're starting to plan that. And we talk about that being a reserve list. So our target remains the 1 to 4 cohorts. But what we don't want to do is waste vaccines. So as we start to try and balance the number of vaccines that we actually receive with the people coming and attending, we know that it's likely that we will have vaccines that are either sat within the vaccination centre that have been invited from the National Booking Centre and also local vaccination sites, i.e. our GP practices, start to get a feel when they are planning their clinics, how many people they ring who then respond and say, I have now already booked onto the vaccination centre, and that could be in the range of about 20%. So that starts to help local vaccination sites draw down into the next cohort, but they're relatively small numbers at this point, and they're really about targeting and making sure that we have very little waste. The delivery of vaccines to our vaccination sites is still somewhat last minute. So our sites don't have a week to plan clinics, but they are managing, and what's happening at a national level is vaccines are being moved around within 24, 48 hours as we start to get data to make sure that vaccines are going to the geographical places in and around the country that need more vaccines to hit the cohorts 1 to 4 that they still need to deliver to. So that's just an artifact of trying to get the most vulnerable people delivered in the shortest possible time. So we are doing very well, and as I say, our local vaccination sites anticipate very busy end of week weekend clinics, and we'll see that data come through in the start of next week. So alongside that, we're starting to work with our local authority colleagues to really understand how we start moving forward, not just necessarily into the next cohorts, but how we do more work to address hard to reach groups. So we're doing that work now with any of our homeless cohorts, traveller communities, anybody who traditionally hasn't registered with a GP, and it's absolutely not necessary to register with a GP to get a vaccine. So we're working with, as I say, local authority and our voluntary sector partners who are often closer to those different groups of people. So small numbers, but they're really important to us to make sure that we flex our service to make sure that we hit the most vulnerable groups. So the group I haven't talked about is Housebound, and that's happening with our local services. And I know that we respond quite readily to councillor and MP queries, and it just feels that we get a query at the start of the week, but we're already planning to do that on a Thursday or a Friday. So we acknowledge that our residents are very keen and very eager to make sure that they're not missed, and we're trying to respond as flexibly as we can. So that's probably as much as I wanted to say about the activity, but I just wanted to just highlight that we're working across all partner organisations through our communication routes, just to continue to highlight that it's really disappointing that we continue to have such a high level of notification about fraudulent messages going out to our citizens. And most recently, we've again reiterated through social media that we would never ask people to pay or share any sort of personal banking details. So we'll continue to highlight that position as well. So that's my update. We're in the high 90% going into this week of completing our 1 to 4 cohorts, which are the 70 and upwards, and we're continuing to work with our major employers and independent sectors to make sure that our frontline health and social care staff are also being vaccinated.
Thank you very much for that. Open for any questions or comments. The one thing from me, just to check, you mentioned, like you say, some figures for number of vaccines that were slightly different from Fiona. Presumably your figures relate to a wider Vale of York NHS footprint?
We can report on Vale of York, but we normally do it as a system level with North Yorkshire and York, yes.
Because I just remind me if I'm wrong, but you said between 300 and 350,000, which is obviously significantly more than the population of York.
Yes, you're absolutely right. So the NHS England figures show that Humber Coast and Vale has carried out 295,000 that I was looking at, and I know that that's gone up to 350 for our ICS. So thank you for getting that clarification.
Great, thank you very much. I cannot see any other virtual hands raised, so just in case any others, Fiona.
Yeah, it's just something that we get asked from residents reasonably frequently, is about physical access to the sites that you have, and for people who don't live that side of the city and don't have transport, and whether there are plans for more local vaccination sites. I know at one point there was talk about pharmacies being able to deliver vaccines. I'm not sure what the latest on that is.
So there are two aspects to that. One is that we do allow individual sites to operate as a satellite site to pick up a target community where we're picking up that patients in this sense, because they're being contacted by their practice. So we have had some satellite services out at Tower Court at Clifton, Elvington. We've got some Stamford Bridge clinics running this weekend, and you're all going to be better at the York geography. That's the east of the city. So what Askham Bar have been doing is also working with the voluntary sector to make sure that anybody who is finding that difficult know that there is a free transport service. So I'm hoping that will address that. Now, if that messaging isn't getting out, then I'll pick that up back in the CCG and with Askham Bar in particular. So your other question was about pharmacies, and the region and the national team invited pharmacies to apply to be vaccination sites pre-Christmas, and haven't opened that up again. and we don't anticipate pharmacies coming online in our sort of Vale of York geographical area probably until sort of March time. So I don't think that will be I don't think that will be a ready solution. If people imagine that pharmacies coming online will mean that there'll be a proliferation. There are quite stringent approval criteria to be an approved site. And even though we're sort of now in the middle of February, I've been notified that next week we should expect not exactly unannounced visits, because we know about them, but visits by to come and do security audits. So it's not as straightforward as running a flu service out of the pharmacy sites as we normally do, even though they offer a really great service around the flu sites. We've got very specific criteria to meet, both in terms of the physical environment and the training and the security of the vaccine itself, because it's under license.
Thank you very much for that. Sian.
Yeah, and thanks, Fiona reminded me asking her question of a question that somebody had asked me the other day, which was about when the information goes out, is there any chance of including something a bit more about what sorts of transport could be used alternatively to the site? Because I think we've had a lot of inquiries from people who choose not to use cars. York is obviously a very cycle-friendly city, and they were just wondering whether there was any information that could be provided about using accessible transport, sustainable transport systems out to the site, and whether that's acceptable given what's going on at the site. So I just wondered if you had any information about that.
Good point, and I will raise it. It depends how people are invited to the site. If they go via the national booking, I think that's a standard template, but I'll pick up to make sure that the communications from Ask and Bar and the social media presence and all the places where we advertise the service pick up those other aspects. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. So at this stage, if we could note the update from Steph, and thank you very much for that. And then that takes us on to agenda item 5, which is on test and trace and an update on contact tracing in the city. And I'm handing back to Fiona.
Thank you. Yeah, so again, I've got some slides just because there's a little bit of data here and figures to show you. So if we go on to the first slide, this just gives you some numbers really in terms of what we've achieved since the 14th of December, which was when we started our local authority programme of lateral flow testing. So these were predominantly the tests that we carried out working in partnership with the 2 universities at their site, and it shows you the number of tests that have been carried out at each of those sites, and we've separated them by at each site which are residents and which are university staff or students. This starts from the 14th of December, so it doesn't include the thousands of tests that each university did earlier in December prior to students returning home for Christmas. So the vast majority of those are not included in these stats. I've also included at the bottom there our latest site at the York Leisure Complex up at the new stadium site. This data goes up till the 8th of January, so it just captures the first day of operation, which obviously we did as a sort of we only had a few lanes open just to get the staff used to the procedures up there, but I included that and wanted to make the point that we've got that third site site up and operational now. The other bit that these overall numbers doesn't include as well is, if you remember, we tested when we thought children were going back to school. We also tested 527 secondary school pupils in that weekend prior to term starting, which of course it then didn't start. So as you can see, since the 14th of December through this programme, we have found 263 people that tested positive who otherwise would not have known they were positive for COVID and potentially could have gone on to infect many more people. So, it's been positive in that it is finding cases of COVID, and then we can ensure that those people are isolated and follow up with any contacts. The other thing just to note, obviously when we started this process, if you had a positive lateral flow test, the national guidance was that you would go on to have a confirmatory PCR test. As of the 27th of January, that confirmatory PCR testing has been paused. So now if you attend one of our sites and have a positive lateral flow test, the contact tracing process and the 10-day isolation kicks in from the point of that positive lateral flow test. If we just go on then to look at the next slide. So this just shows by 2-week blocks in terms of the resident testing, what we're doing at each site. The University of York is the green bars and the black is the York St John's site. So again, this doesn't include those secondary school pupils, and it doesn't include the early university student tests that were done. But what it shows is that you can see that since we started on the 14th of December, demand for symptom-free testing has increased. We may have started to see a slight dip in the latest 2-week period up till the 7th of February. It's gone down slightly, but certainly from middle of December into January, we were seeing increasing demand for people who wanted to have that symptom-free testing and know what their infection status was. So we'll continue with comms around that, and particularly with the opening of our new site up at the stadium complex. We're certainly doing a lot of work with businesses that are open in that area to encourage them for their employees to attend and be tested. If you just go on to the next slide. The other thing to mention as well, so obviously that's our lateral flow testing. And when we first talked about this at the board, we had talked about, we wanted to be able to have a reactive offer of symptom-free testing. So if we saw peaks in cases around the city, that we could respond to that. So what we have done is that we have used our what we can access through the Director of Public Health in terms of access to PCR testing capacity, and we've used that to target those areas where we have seen a higher rate of cases. So we did that first with the ward of Bishopthorpe from the week from the 4th to the 11th of January. We had a mobile testing unit in that area. And then also from the 2nd of January for residents in the village of Askham Richard, we used our Director of Public Health direction to advise those residents to attend the drive-through site to have symptom-free testing at that site. We've also since had a mobile testing facility at the Aiken Acorn Rugby Club, which is for residents of Woodthorpe, Dringhouses and Acombe. Initially, that was there for a period from the 6th to the 13th of January, and since the 13th we've extended that, so it's usually there for 2 days per week, and we let residents know when it's going to be there each week. And then more recently, we've had a mobile facility at the Ethel Ward playing fields, which is for residents of Haxby, Wigington and Stransell. Again, it was initially for a week up to the 7th of February, but we're going to continue with a presence for probably for 2 days a week for residents of that area as well. So, and we review what our rates are doing in various wards across the city, so that we can provide an offer to people where we think rates are high and it would benefit from additional testing resource. So then just going on to the next slide, I just wanted to say a little bit about surge testing, because I'm sure people have picked up that this is something that is happening in other parts of the country, to just sort of say a little bit around that. So this is what's being done when a new variant is identified in an area. So at the moment it's being done in parts of the country in relation to the South African variant, and the idea really is to test a sample of the population in your area to determine if that new variant has been spread within the community. So what's generally happened in other parts of the country is where they've had that new variant, they've selected a number of postcodes which has been determined by the national team, and then locally you're requested to work with the national team to offer symptom-free PCR testing to the population aged over 16 in certain postcode areas. So if we should get cases of new variants where we're requested to do that by the national team, it's likely that that would be a 2-week programme of testing. And really the key within this, if we have to do it, is first of all that it's basically a public awareness campaign. So we're working with our colleagues in communications to have a campaign ready to go if we are required to do that. And then depending on the postcode areas that are selected, there could be different options for providing testing in that area. So it could be door-to-door delivering of PCR test kits, it could be via a community venue, one of our existing testing venues, or through a mobile testing unit. So we're working with various partners at the moment to prepare for having to do any of those kind of regimes of testing. And also working with agencies in terms of the comms that we would have to get out there. So, you know, we do some on social media and local radio, but also sort of door to door, boots on the ground, getting messages out into communities if we're required to do that. So we have that plan in place. If we move on to the next slide, then this is just in terms of our going on now to our contact tracing. So this graph shows the number of contact tracing calls that we are doing locally. So you can see from that top line, the sort of red and black line, the number of number of calls that we were doing locally came down early in November, increased just before Christmas, and it's now starting to drop again. So at the peak, our team was dealing with around 141 cases over a course of a week that they were following up to do contact tracing with. In the week up to the 3rd of February, it was 41 cases over the course of a week. And then if we just go on to the next slide, this gives a little bit more detail in terms of our success rate. So the graph shows in black, the black bars are the proportion of cases that we successfully contact, fluctuates quite a bit, has been as high as 88% in the most recent week up until the 3rd of February. We successfully contacted 65% of the cases we were asked to contact. And then the green bar shows a proportion of people that we are unable to contact over the phone, that we then have to do a home visit for. And what you can see is there's, you know, quite a few weeks where we have to visit around half of all people because they don't respond to the phone calls. So what we're finding really is obviously these are people that the national team have tried to contact first, and when they can't contact them, they hand them to us, and these are really the people who don't want to pick up the phone. So quite a high proportion we will then go out and pay a visit to, and if we can't get hold of them on the doorstep, we leave written information for them. And then if you just go on to the next slide. So this just demonstrates, in combination with what the national track and trace team do and what we can do locally, it means that 90% of all COVID cases are successfully contacted, which means that we get the details of any contacts that they have, and those people can be followed up. And then the cases have been given the information about their isolation period. And an important part of for what we do as a local service in York in terms of contacting people is not only ensuring that they understand about having to isolate, but also that they are offered any support locally if they need it with being able to self-isolate. And then just going on to the last slide was just to sort of mention, you know, some of our aspirations in terms of our local contact tracing service. So we would be interested, and we've expressed that interest to the national team to do all tracing locally of cases, and also expressing an interest in something that is being taken forward nationally in terms of enhanced contact tracing. So this is basically when somebody tests positive, not only are you gathering details around who they've been in contact, you're doing more of a look back in terms of where have they been in the days prior to them testing positive. But not only then doing that, you're then actually taking forward in terms of, you know, doing a bit of an investigation where particular venues are mentioned, to kind of then follow up in terms of who else has been in that venue and giving notifications to people who've been in that venue. And that's really kind of gearing up in terms of opening up businesses as we come out of lockdown, so that we do more investigation around businesses where outbreaks may have occurred. So that is something that we would be interested in doing locally. I think there'll be a number of pilots selected, so we'll see where we get with that. And then the other bit of work that we'll be doing with our team locally is just in terms of what more we can do to improve our contact rate. So as I say, we've seen it dip a little bit to around 60%. Some of that's about recording issues. So sometimes we close the case in the computer record, and then the next day the person rings up and we do the contact tracing, but once a case is closed in the computer system, you can't go back in and edit it. So there's some sort of recording issues that we can address there. We're having conversations with partners, particularly the police, in terms of how they might be able to support with some of the home visits, in trying to contact people if they don't respond to our first attempts, so doing sort of increased follow-up and also exploring what other means of follow-up we can do as well. So at the moment we do send a text message to tell people that we're going to be calling, and then we call, then we do a home visit. We're looking at whether we can send emails as well to people. So just really sort of all that we can do, and also some of the comms as well that our colleagues are doing in terms of just sort of saying to people, you know, please do pick up the phone and speak to us. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Fiona. And again, open to any questions or comments on the presentation. Carol.
Thank you, Keith. I think the data that Fiona's just presented to us shows the strength of what we can do locally. And for me, it's a great shame that the contact tracing wasn't handed over to us and hasn't been handed over to us as we have requested. Because I think part of the important thing is that you get local people who can quickly contact residents who need to be contacted and give them advice. And as she says, there's a reason sometimes why they're not being contacted, why we can't get them, and we can often help with that. So our submissions to government to ask them to let us do it, I think is absolutely the right thing to do. We need the proper support to do that, and we need proper communication. But I'm very impressed with the figures that Fiona's given us.
Thank you very much for that, Carol. Fiona, I don't know if you want to add, but I'm sure you agree with what Carol has said. I can see a nod. Thank you very much. Lisa.
Thank you, Chair. And just from a policing perspective, again, the local element's been very welcome, and we have raised at a national level the fact that colleagues across forces, and not particularly in the City of York, but other colleagues have found that when they have attended addresses and done the doorstep checks, the vast majority of people are compliant and are isolating and would have answered the telephone had they known that a specific number was going to contact them. Or so I think the text messaging, emailing is very positive, because the vast majority of people are telling us that they won't answer cold calls for obvious reasons, because they're generally companies trying to sell them something. So they just ignore the telephone calls and then not left a message by the National Tracing Service. So we have raised that if there could be some media or communication around a specific number, and this is the number of the tracing people, please answer it, we might have a little more success in terms of people answering the telephone, and reduce the need of police officers having to physically attend people's home addresses when clearly we get there and there was no need. So listening to Fiona's description of how we've locally addressed that in terms of texts and emails and leaving messages for people is very welcome.
Thank you very much for that. And Sharon, you wanted to come in.
Yes, it's just a question really for the board. We've been wanting to do our own enhanced contact tracing in York for some time now. And I've been continually frustrated by us wanting to move quicker than the government has been prepared to. And as Fiona has said in her presentation, even though we've submitted our expression of interest for enhanced contact tracing, our understanding is that the government will choose a number of pilots. And I just wondered whether the board feels sufficiently strongly about this, that we would want to perhaps write to lobby Department of Health and Social Care to say, look, York as a city is up for this. It's something that we really want to do. Please choose us as one of those pilots. We will get the additional funding that we need to do this. So funding isn't an issue. It's just, I think, trying to kind of add any additional impetus that we might want to give as a board to York being chosen as one of those areas.
Thank you very much. So I could see a couple of nods and a thumbs up. with that suggestion. So I'll just give anybody an opportunity to say that they don't agree with us sending that letter, as it seemed that there was pretty much a consensus for that direction of travel. So we can pick that up, Sharon, as an action from that agenda item. I can't see any other questions, so just to say thank you very much, Fiona, for the presentation and an update. I think that Lisa's points around communications are really important, and I'm sure Claire will pick that up later in terms of any ways we can repeat and share and give that information out in different ways as possible. So thank you very much for that. And that will now move us on to agenda item 6. You'll remember that we previously had a presentation about the economic impact of lockdown, and thought that we should get an update. So Simon has been invited back. So welcome, Simon, and I'll hand straight over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Afton, and I hope you can see my presentation in front of you. Yes, so last time I presented quite a detailed set of figures in terms of the overall impact of the whole of the pandemic. This time I'm going to try and be a bit more brief and take you through really what the latest data is telling you. But just to remind you, the headlines really from last time were this is probably going to take 2 or more years to recover from the situation that we're in, and that there remains a significant risk to jobs. Those headlines haven't changed. What we are in is is the January lockdown. So really, I'm going to try and bring you up to speed on the data on January. And I'm going to take you through where we are in terms of city centre footfall and spend, the impacts on work and employment, how many of us are experiencing lockdown, some of the national statistics from the ONS's fortnightly surveys of businesses, and then some of the issues that are coming to us from the local business community in terms of the challenges that they see ahead. So to start with, here are the footfall figures for York City Centre in January. And the headline there is that footfall is down below a third of what it would be in a normal year. So it's actually very much back at where we were in lockdown 1. Interestingly, I think people are thinking that maybe the city centre is a bit more busy than it was then, but the statistics are showing us that actually we're back at lockdown 1 level. And interestingly for me, we've gone from Saturday being the busiest day of the week to Monday being the busiest day of the week. It has often been the day that locals go into York to buy groceries and things, and I think that's probably what we're seeing. But changing patterns in use of the city centre, and say footfall right down at where it was in the first lockdown. In terms of spend, these spend figures are actually from December. There's a bit of lag in getting this information through, but of course income in December plays through into January cash flow for many city centre businesses, and the headline figure there is that although we were open in December, and we all know some of the consequences of that from a public health context, we hoped that would bring some strength back to our city centre businesses, but actually income was down 40% down on a normal December, down on what it was in 2019. So retailers didn't recover their losses from earlier in the year. They did had a reasonable December, but actually it just highlights that the spring is going to be difficult. Again, that was one of the themes that I emphasised last time, was that it was at this point of the year that we were really going to be seeing some of the difficulties. I say spend is down to 40%. That's that yellow bar on the left, merchant spend and non-visa spend. On the right, we've got the online spend. That's actually it's spend in city centre businesses, and it's spend by city centre residents. So we're seeing that residents have been spending a lot more online. We can't really read those figures across to the whole of the York economy. But as I say, the headline there is December, while it wasn't a terrible month, was very much down on previous years. And we would hope that the cash that businesses make in December would be enough to see them through spring. We're not sure that that's really where we are. In terms of the claimant count, it's still the case that more people in York are claiming unemployment benefits than at any time for 25 years. However, on the plus side, that figure is stable, if not slightly falling, and York is still the city in the UK with the smallest increase, although I'll say it again, that's cold comfort for any of those 3,000 people that have unfortunately lost jobs already. And in terms of what we might see ahead of us, we have 25,000 York residents receiving either income subsidy through furlough payments or wage subsidy through the self-employment support scheme, and we're back at July levels with that. So 25,000 people who without that government support would either be severely losing income or potentially out of a job. That's not to say that there will be 25,000 job losses at the end of this, but I think we need to recognise that that's probably the scale of what's at risk. In terms of the ONS statistics on business health overall, and I say this comes from the fortnightly surveys that they're doing with businesses across the whole of the country, something like 70% of businesses are currently trading, but in hospitality, that's down at about a third of businesses trading, 2/3 not, and that's again is lowest. That's back down to lockdown 1 situation. Nationally, 17% of employees are furloughed. Again, the level last seen in July 2020 and certainly maps through to what we're seeing in York. And worryingly, something like 15% of businesses that are trading at the moment don't expect to survive the next 3 months. In York, that would mean something like 1,000 businesses potentially at risk of closure, depending on how long this lockdown goes on, and something like 15,000, 16,000 jobs potentially at risk from business closure over the next few months. So I say it's very much the picture I've painted you before. Those risks continue. In terms of what businesses are saying to us, these are the key emerging businesses that we're getting, messages we're getting from the business community. We're in regular contact and just take the opportunity to thank once again the Federation of Small Businesses, the Chamber of Commerce, the Institute of Directors, the Business Improvement District, and our colleagues at Make It York for the help they've given us in terms of talking regularly with the business community and having that regular contact. Mental health is really the top of the list in terms of what people are talking about at the moment, both in terms of the stress that business owners are under, but also the stress that employees are under as well, in terms of either continuing to work from home or that uncertainty that comes with the risk to jobs. There's a lot of more financial risk around at the moment. That lost income that I've pointed to in the city centre is reflected across most businesses are down in terms of income. The business loans that people have taken out, often subsidised loans that the government have offered, but those loans are going to be due soon, and there's concern about how they will pay them back. Things like rent have been deferred and not written off by almost all landlords inevitably, but the income that would normally pay those rents has not come in. So there's a problem down the road there, and businesses are under great pressure in terms of finance, as I've highlighted in the national figures. That's being seen locally as well. People are down really to the bottom of what they have in reserve, and are very much hoping that this lockdown is not going to continue for too long. Although I think realistically, we'll wait and see what the roadmap says on the 22nd of February. But I think we're probably looking towards May really before we're going to get a lot of businesses open again, and the likely impacts on employment flow from those financial pressures. So that lack of cash flow, that lack of reserves really to help people through, means that there is a risk to those many people in York who are furloughed, and those many businesses that are on hold through self-employment income support. We're also seeing changes in working patterns, and people increasingly now talking, it's something we've tried to touch on with business owners over the period of the pandemic, is what do they see the working world looking like when they come back, but that the changes in patterns in terms of home working and hours, flexible hours, people are beginning to see are likely to continue and become normal practice. So for instance, a lot of property lawyers are getting inquiries about break clauses in their leases and thinking about downsizing in office space. on one hand, this is potentially a concern, but there are positives to take from this. If I was talking to businesses a year ago about what the challenges were in terms of property in York, I would have a lot of people saying we want to expand and we haven't got anywhere to expand to. So the patterns have changed. Working from home is going to continue. We know that something like a third of the workforce nationally is currently working from home, and I think that's probably similarly the case here in York. And we expect the world that we come back to post lockdown to be quite different. So a run through the statistics there. That's the end of my slides. I'm sorry I don't have a beautifully positive picture to paint for you, but that's the data as it stands, and happy to take any questions that anyone has. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Simon. I should have said at the start of that item, if we could also record apologies for James Farrer, who sent me a note saying that his broadband has failed him, but he has tried to get on various different ways. So just to add that. Simon, if we could attach the presentation to the minutes of the meeting, as I know it didn't go out in advance, that would be fantastic.
I'll make sure that happens, Councillor Austin, and my apologies for them not coming out sooner, but there's data that only came out on Monday that's included, so that's my excuse.
Great, thank you very much. Little bit like Sharon's point around frustrations. Obviously we've been running a Back York campaign, asking for support, not just for the council, but also for businesses. And obviously in particular, I know a number of organisations, as you say, FSB, Chamber, Make It York, BID, have all joined forces in particular because of the impact on cultural and hospitality trade, but also pubs and small businesses, which some of your figures really sort of show. And for me, it does really reflect the importance of that roadmap. What is the national plan post furlough? What can businesses expect in terms of long-term support when it is a reasonably slow return over quite a significant period to come? And how will cities like York that have a particular makeup with, for example, hospitality and leisure trade get that additional support so that we can pass it on in turn for businesses? So certainly on the back of your figures, I'm quite happy to redouble our efforts with those partners in making that case. You probably don't have any answers yet apart from making that case nationally, but anything, Simon, to comment about that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we are planning for how we will handle the reopening of the economy. It's very hard to put anything concrete in place without having dates in mind. And interesting, there's a lot of caution from the business community in terms of not over promoting when we don't really know what might happen. I think quite a lot of people were quite chastened by what happened through December. I said the trade was down, but we certainly had plenty of visitors coming from all across the UK, and I think everyone found that very difficult to deal with. So we're in active conversation with, for instance, the tourism businesses in York through the Tourism Advisory Board, and with our colleagues at Visit York, are very much an important part of Make It York, about how we will make sure that we keep York in people's minds for when the economy reopens. And we're beginning to plan what we might do in terms of practical events on the ground through the summer as well. All the indications are that perhaps summer 2021 will be a bit like summer 2020, which was a good summer for businesses in York. And we'll do everything we can to support them. More generally, a lot of businesses, as I say, we're continuing to work from home. And there are some businesses that are trading as normal through this. Our emphasis, of course, has to be on those that are finding it most difficult. And you're right, that's particularly those in tourism and hospitality sector in York. But everyone wants to avoid what Bournemouth saw at very early on after the first lockdown, with a huge wave of people coming in and the challenges that brings. We're looking at how we can refresh things like the signage across the city centre, make sure we get the messaging out that York is open, but for people who want to come and follow the guidelines and behave in the right way. And I think we're reassured that whatever the challenge is, people across the UK recognise that York is a fantastic city to come and visit, and as soon as they can do, they will come and visit. So really our challenge is to try and work how we can make that happen in the safest possible way, that also make sure that businesses can make a decent income from it as well. So yeah, there's lots going on that is really kind of hard to present in any detailed form. But at the moment, I think there's, we're still in a very concerning situation, as I say, in terms of the number of people who are furloughed.
Thank you very much. Carol.
Thank you, Keith. Simon's presentation was as interesting this time as it was last time. I was fascinated by it then, and I am now. I'm very, very interested that businesses have put mental health at the top of their list of issues. It's been top of the list in the Health and Wellbeing Board for quite a long time. And I think what he's highlighted for me is the fact that mental health issues are coming up in all age groups, not just our school children where we know there's a problem, not just our older people where we know there's loneliness and isolation, but also in people that own businesses that are desperate to keep them going, people that want to go to work and can't go to work. I think there's a lot of problems coming up. I was talking to Brent Kilmurray the other day from TUV, he's Chief Executive of TUV, and they are certainly preparing for many more serious cases to come to them. As a council, we are planning to put money into low-level mental health support, but I think the government are going to have to put money into more serious levels of mental health support, because I don't think this is something you can take a pill for. I think it's something that is going to go on for some considerable time. And Simon, thank you for highlighting it for us. And it's good to know that businesses realise that this is a problem and we must help and support them to get through it.
Thank you for that, Carol. I think one thing we should do on the work plan for this board is actually ask for a specific agenda item. And I know that Phil, who's not here, has started to do some work through the CCG and with health colleagues on that. So if we could get that as an action, I can see some nods for Tracy to liaise, and then we can pick that up in more detail. Sian.
I just wanted to thank Simon for his presentation. I thought it was hugely interesting again. And I think so much of it chimes with what we're seeing in the voluntary and community sector, issues around mental health, challenges for people running organisations, challenges for people working in those organisations, and challenges for the people we work with. I think it's really important to note that the mental health challenges aren't just about support with mental health, but actually about practical support with the day-to-day things that are causing you stress and anxiety. And at a time where people need help, information, advice more than ever, 2/3 of charities face closure within the next 12 months. So I just think it's really important to acknowledge that there are many sectors struggling with this, many people struggling with this. And I think how we all come out of this stronger together is really important.
Thank you very much for that. Julia.
Thanks, Keith. I suppose all of us on here have probably got data and information about issues around mental health. And I wonder whether actually the agenda item could pool our data and experiences around this. I mean, we did a really interesting analysis of the impact on victims and witnesses from our local criminal justice partnership recently, and we were looking at the types of support that our supporting victims team are providing people, and it's really clear that they are going beyond the sort of support as a victim of crime into general support because of COVID. And so I think we've all got probably information and data that we could contribute to that to try and create quite a rich picture around it.
I think that would be really valuable. I don't know, Sharon, if you've got anything to add, because I know that Phil is in the process of arranging a roundtable with partners that I believe Tim Madrick was going to be asked to lead on, partly to bring and pull together all of that resource. And but I don't know off the top of my head, Sharon, the timescale of that work.
No, I don't either. And it's something that I've got on my to-do list to have a conversation with Tim Madgwick about. I mean, mental health is a major issue for us as a city, isn't it? And we're all, well, as individuals, will be experiencing impacts on our own mental health as well as businesses and residents across the city. So I completely agree we need to focus on it. I will take as an action to have a follow-up conversation with Tim Madgwick and Phil Metham, and we'll make sure that between the Mental Health Partnership, that citywide roundtable and this board, that we do something collaborative. So I'll take that away as an action, and then can update the board on how we intend to take that forward.
Thank you, Sharon. Julia, you wanted to come back in?
No, I just wondered whether it might be good to invite after that roundtable Tim here to come and talk about it. I don't know. And whether I don't know what support that Tim's board has got, and what sort of analytical or other types of support might be available to help him coalesce all of that into something quite structured. But that would be really interesting.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. If Sharon, you could pick that up with that idea of it coming back here,
yeah.
I think that would be great.
Yeah, we can do the piece of work under the banner of the Joint Strategic Needs Assessment, because then we've got the data protection arrangements in place to be able to share data across organisations as well. So I can include that as part of that conversation.
That's great. Thank you very much. And Simon, before we move on, just to come back in case there are any concluding remarks you wanted to make.
I'll just say something very quickly in terms of practically what we're trying to do within my team and around that mental health piece. You'll recall, of course, Councillor Aston, that as part of that Inclusive Growth Fund money that you allocated, there's a mental health theme within that. We're looking at working with University of York St John's occupational health team and those business networks that I mentioned before to see what we can do on a practical level around that. So hopefully that's something that we can add in to the collective efforts around that. So no, really, I just know the situation's emerging still at the moment. We're in a very difficult time for the economy. Hopefully next time I come to update you, perhaps in 2 or 3 months' time, we'll have a slightly more positive picture to paint and more to say about how we'll be supporting the economy reopening. But at the moment, it's batten down the hatches and see what we can get through to the other side.
Thank you for that, Simon. So we'll note that presentation and obviously the questions and actions that came out of it. And that then takes us on to agenda item 7, which is the communications update, and over to Claire.
Thank you, Chair. So as always, I've got a presentation that will hopefully appear on the screen shortly. During the course of this presentation, I'll pick up on some of the themes that have come out during the course of the meeting. So I've made a note of testing, vaccinations, and also responding to how we might want to reopen the economy, or some work that we're doing in that space. And of course, if I miss anything or if there's anything you want to add, please do ask questions at the end. So if we can go on to the next slide. As always, we are reinforcing those 4 key messages, which is really consistently applied throughout all of our communications. And I always want to remind you what those 4 key messages are. They are, of course, hands, face, space, and test. If we can go on to the next slide, please. Just a reminder, there's 3 phases of the outbreak management communications strategy. Phase 1, which is when we are mostly in the reopening space. Phase 2, which we've been in as restrictions have been applied and as cases have become more prevalent. And then now, where we are right now, managing an outbreak. So as we are in lockdown. If we can move on to the next slide, please. I've mapped the dates to this slide, which you won't have seen from previously, really just to show you how much how often York has changed its tiers and its restriction levels. And I certainly, like many of us, I'm sure, welcome the fact that it sounds like we won't be going into the tier model next time when we come out of lockdown, and it's going to be more sector-based. That should help with communications, and it should help with managing some of the flow of people to and through the city. If we can move to the next slide, please. Just to remind you, we have a roadmap. We have frequent communications that happen in a sort of stone colour during the different periods of tiers, whether it's tier 1, tier 2, or whether it's local lockdown restrictions, and then various different campaigns. And one of the campaigns that we added to this month was, we've called it anniversary, but essentially it's a year on. And on the 31st of January, you may recall, it was our year since we had the first cases reported in York, and indeed the UK as a whole, when the pandemic came to this country. And we'll have another reflection on the 23rd of March, and I'll come on to that shortly. So if we can move on. And again. Move on again, please. Thank you. So, sharing accurate and timely messaging, we released 24 press releases this month. During the month, we also had a flood incident. So we had what could have been a significant flooding event. It turned out not to be as significant as we were anticipating, but of course we had to prepare. So one of the things I'll come on to later is how we actually managed to communicate a COVID-safe flood response on top of just the general operational requirements of a flood. If we can move on. So year on, a moment of reflection, of recognising some of the significant loss that people have experienced, both from a very personal perspective, but also from livelihoods and from obviously struggling through the restrictions and what's happening to the economy, as we've just heard from Simon. There was a great deal of media scrutiny around this event. We worked very, very closely with the University of York, which also shared the occasion, sharing briefs, working out our key messages. And as you can see, we were covered in most of in the Nationals, Guardian picked up on the story, ITV, BBC covered it extensively. So a big thanks to the University of York, and of course a big thanks to Sharon, who found herself on the TV quite frequently during that day. If we can move on, please. We continue to build confidence in the steps people can take through our regular rhythm of communications, and we've increased our opt-ins, our registrations for our newsletter updates. As you can see, the resident newsletter has increased by 44% since last month. And of course, if you need to increase your resident newsletters, you do need a good crisis. So the flooding certainly helped encourage people to get the accurate and up-to-date information as quickly as possible. If we can move on. We continued to build our engagement through conversations. We held 4 Facebook Lives. That was predominantly as a result of lockdown. We increased the frequency. One of the things to highlight with our Facebook Live events is during the actual event, we have roughly 400 to 600 views, but then after the event we can get into the thousands quite quickly, so people are watching it back. Other things that people are doing with it, which I find quite interesting, is using it to answer questions amongst their peers on social media. So they'll either indicate a time that somebody should watch it, or sometimes they'll cut out a snippet from the actual Facebook Live to provide the expert advice or the expert answer to a question. So it just goes to show how our communications are used differently across different channels. Next slide, please. Next slide. So as we said, we're in Outbreak. When we started this, when we came into lockdown on the 4th of January, we were something in the region of 650 cases per 100,000. Obviously, that's fallen dramatically, and we're delighted to see those cases coming down and the positivity rate coming down. In the meantime, of course, we've continued to share information to connect people to the help they need, and we've continued to share national messaging. If you can move to the next slide, please. One of the things we did, which I talked about in our last time we met on the 13th of January, was we were going to contact everybody in the city with a personal letter from the leaders, Councillor Aston, Councillor de Gorn and Ian Floyd, and provide a health and wellbeing A5 booklet, which really again helped connect them to support, but also addressed the scams. So we talked about scams earlier in the meeting, and there is information about what to look out for if you feel you're being scammed in that booklet. We provided 2 different letters, one for people who are not shielding and one for people who were and continue to shield. And we provided an open letter to all residents, which we published in York Press to make sure as many people got it as possible. If we can move on. So Storm Christoph, we experienced what could have been an incredibly significant flooding event. As it was, thankfully, we didn't get the levels we were anticipating. However, we did, of course, have to respond as if we did. So operationally, the frontline team worked incredibly hard to make sure that not only did they stay safe, but they managed to keep people safe in a COVID safe way. We shared information to help people understand how they too could stay safe, both as a result of the flooding event or the anticipated flooding event. And also, one of the things we were incredibly concerned about was the natural flow of information that runs through the city informally, not as a result of the communications we provide or our partners provide, but those informal communications that happen at school gates, in pubs, at meetings, in community groups, just wouldn't happen with the lockdown situation. So we worked incredibly carefully with and closely with our media partners and with our partners to make sure as much information got to as many people as possible. And that included providing letters to those people who may have been affected, providing our COVID marshals with communications that they could share, and providing regular media briefings and a Facebook Live to answer questions. The types of things that our operation colleagues put in place to make sure that people could be kept safe during COVID included, for example, COVID safe evacuation plans. So it would have been hard for people to stay safe and reduce the risk of the spread of infection whilst also evacuating. So we made sure there weren't any, rather than using village halls, for example, or community spaces to act as an evacuation hall, we worked with a local hotel. So if we can move on, please. Testing. So we talked about testing earlier. We've worked very closely with public health and partners to make sure we can tell as many people as possible what testing is available and where they can get it. We've obviously promoted the stadium as our new facility for providing testing, which is great. The Cabinet Office have produced a short video of one of our test and trace people talking about the experience of what it's like to be tested. We've driven as many people as we can to our website to get more information, and in fact during January over 82,000 people visited the testing page, which is just short of 10%, the highest visited council page of that particular month. If we can move on to the next page, sorry, the next slide, thank you. We've launched a My COVID Story complacency campaign. This has been very, very well received, and thank you so much to so many partners who are as part of this group who've helped support that. We featured the stories of either the lived experience of residents, and particularly those within the age group that we're trying to encourage to adopt those safety measures, or we've worked with the sports clubs who are particularly targeting their own networks of particularly male, but of course families as well, with messages from sporting heroes, if you like, from across York. And we've provided case studies from our partners. So particularly this one shown is the story of Joe, who's a consultant in charge of critical care at York Hospital. And his story particularly has really stuck a chime with so many people and was shared so positively. And so many people added their own thoughts about how wonderfully committed Joe is and the experience they've had of Joe, and also the experience they've had at the hospital. So it's really heartwarming to see some of those stories. And you can see the reach and the engagement has been phenomenal. We'll continue with the COVID case studies over the duration of lockdown. We're going to introduce ones around masks. So people who don't need to wear masks or they're exempt, their experiences and talking about what it means to them to sort of move around the city without wearing a mask, even though because they're exempt, and also talking about having some stories from people who've either been vaccinated or are vaccinators, if that's a word, to sort of talk about bring a little bit of hope into these case studies so that we can see where we're going and the future. Move on. Vaccinations, we just touched on that. So currently with vaccinations, we are sharing as much of the official information as we possibly can. We've featured that in our resident update. We're sharing the information we get from the NHS and always share the Nimbus Care communications as much as we possibly can, providing more information to residents, to our partners, and through the networks that we've got, really sharing other people's content. And of course, when we get to a point where we may be invited to provide more information, we'll be drawing on those partnerships again to make sure we can reach as many people as possible. Moving on, please. So next steps, we talked about my COVID case study, my COVID story, working with St London's Hospice on case studies as well as testing vaccinations and the masks. We've talked about vaccination communications, and then in response to some of the information that Simon shared earlier, we are working with behavioural insight specialists to look at how we can prepare the city to reopen. And that's really about priming and prompting visitors to the city to know what they need to do to keep themselves and us, of course, safe. And it's an attempt to mitigate some of the risks of people coming back into the city. Because what we don't want to do, of course, is walk into a fourth spike now. But equally, we want to make sure we've got a viable economy. So it's what can we do, learning from behaviour insight experts to help us prepare the city better. And we'll be sharing the expertise with our partners who themselves have, if you like, open space premises. So the universities, the third sector, particularly, also the voluntary sector, particularly Yorkshire Wildlife Trust, and those that have spaces that we know visitors will be coming to, and how we can help those people who are curating those spaces make sure that they can keep themselves and others safe. So I just wanted to mention surge testing as well, because that came up earlier, and reassure everyone that we too are working on planning the comms response for surge testing. It could happen tomorrow. Let's hope not. It could happen. It might never happen to York. But what we are doing is working as a team and closely with our public health colleagues to make sure that if it happens, we're absolutely ready to go. So we'll have a off-the-shelf content. We're going to operate it as if it was a flood. So working in the same sense as a team, on a localized event across the city. We're working with print suppliers and distributors to make sure they can respond at a moment's notice, which could be 24/7 at any time during a weekend or at night, to make sure that we can always act as quickly as possible should a surge event happen in York. And that's it, really. That's my presentation. If there's any questions, please do let me know. And I apologise for my son who popped in, asked me a question and popped out again. I hope he didn't detract you too much. He told me it was tea.
Thank you very much. I have to say, I didn't notice. I was looking at the slides, so I didn't.
Oh, good.
But thank you very much for that presentation, and also thanks to your team for all of the work behind all of those slides. Mark.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to echo that, Councillor. I think especially the booklet with the mental health focus on how to look after yourself was really well received, and I've spoken to a few of my colleagues at work actually who received it as well and thought it was a brilliant idea. So if you need a bit of feedback from the ground, so to speak, it's been noticed, and I don't think that always necessarily happens when stuff comes through the post box, but this one certainly did. So I thought it was really well done. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you very much.
So I can't see any other hands up. So I think we're being asked to note the presentation and obviously note all of that future work into those key topics. Claire?
I wondered if I could add an agenda item for a future meeting where we come back with a proposal from the behavioural insight specialists. I think that would be helpful for everybody to hear it direct from them if we can, if that's okay.
I can see lots of nods, so I think that's a yes to that. Julia?
I used to have a behavioural insight business, Claire, so I will listen to that with great interest, I have to say. Just congratulations again to you and your team. I just think you're doing a fantastic job. It's great. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Thank you.
And at least, Claire, you obviously mentioned a child coming into the room, and of course, I think it's a Texas lawyer that's gone viral for turning into a cat. So you didn't do that. So we're doing well.
We're doing well. Thank you.
So thank you very much. So we've already done agenda item 8, which was the university's update. So that takes us straight on to agenda item 9, which is an update from Sharon on an outbreak management peer challenge. Sharon.
Yes, I'll be very brief because I know you've wanted to finish the meeting at 7, Keith. This is just really to update board members that there is a process of peer challenge of local authority outbreak management plans. York is in what's being called the first pilot phase. So one local authority has already had their peer challenge. York has been chosen to be the next local authority. So our peer challenge has now been confirmed as taking place on virtually over the 2nd and the 3rd of March, with a feedback session on the 9th of March. The peer review team is going to be headed up by Sarah Norman, who's the Chief Executive of Barnsley Council, but she's also the Regional Chief Exec lead on outbreak management. And the team will also be comprised of colleagues from Public Health England, the Joint Biosecurity Centre and the LGA, including a representation from the LGA Liberal Democrat group, although we haven't had confirmation yet of who that is. So there'll be, because it's virtual, it'll be largely based on an initial session, which will be me presenting our outbreak control plan and where we are with our self-assessment against that. And then there'll be different interviews with different partners who will be able to respond to questions from the peer reviewers about different elements of our response. We've been asked to focus on 2 areas for the review team to particularly focus on. And so the areas we've identified for York are care homes and universities. And that's really because part of the reason for doing these peer challenges is to have a constructive challenge, but also to identify areas of good practice. And we think the York response to care homes and our city response to universities has been very positive. And so we think there will be a lot of learning to be shared from that. So we're working through the process at the moment about how the interviews are going to work. So we are currently getting more information from the LGA team, so that we'll be able then to allocate people to various interview sessions. Some of board members will be invited to be part of those sessions, but not everybody. But I would certainly encourage all members of the board, if possible, to be able to attend the feedback session on the 9th of March. So I'll get Tracy to send out some further information about that as soon as the timing of that session has been agreed. So it all feels a bit last minute, because even though we had these tentative dates agreed for a while, they were actually only confirmed today. But we were already starting to prepare for our visit. We knew it was going to be happening at some stage. And of course, we'll make sure that board members are kept up to date with all of that via emails, so everybody knows what's going on.
Thank you very much for that, Sharon. So for today, we're just noting the fact that there will be that peer challenge, and as Sharon says, please do take part, and particularly if you're invited, that would be appreciated. And obviously, that will result in feedback that I'm sure will find its way back to the Outbreak Management Board to consider. So thank you very much for that. That then takes us on to items for the next agenda. As normal, if you do have any agenda items for the future, please do just contact us and Tracy Wallace, and we'll make sure that's added onto future agendas. On the following agenda item, it's got the dates of our next meetings. So that's the 17th of March, the 7th of April, and the 19th of May. The only question that I'd like to ask now is the council is soon going to be scheduling meetings for after May, and it's whether anybody has any strong preferences as to whether we at least schedule in that same pattern monthly, or we look to change the pattern at that point for the Outbreak Board. You may not have at this stage, or you may want to think about it, but it was just to check if anybody had any strong views at this point in time. I cannot see any hands up. So what I will say is that we will get on with scheduling them monthly as now, but if we want to change that either more or less, we can obviously pick that up over coming months. And then any other business is the final agenda item. I've not been told of any, so I'll just do a check of virtual and in-person hands so that I don't miss anything. Just to say thank you those watching, and obviously those participating. Your time is much appreciated, and I'll see you again at that next meeting, if not before, on the 17th of March. Thank you, everybody.
Confirm